Welcome to the Ordinals Podcast, produced by Ord Media, featuring the top builders, projects, and investors pioneering Bitcoin inscription protocols and the future of digital artifacts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Ordinals Podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar Lifthrasir. In today's episode, we get to learn a lot about how Ordinals works behind the scenes, how the GitHub actually stays alive and is maintained. And we get to hear about the early days of Bitcoin Ordinals. Today, our guest is Raph, or Raph, as some people know him as well. Raph, welcome to the Ordinals Podcast.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so great to have you. You are such a critical component of Ordinals. So you are the lead maintainer of the Ordinals GitHub. So Ordinals /ord, right? And so that is so important, and there's so much that you do there. But I think for your average person, they don't really understand what that means to be the maintainer. So just to start off on a broad level, what does a maintainer do?
Yeah, sure. So on a high level, a maintainer is basically responsible for the repository where all the code for Ord is stored. And this means on a day-to-day basis, I look at PRs. PRs are pull requests, which means is anyone willing to change the code base, adding a feature, adding anything, they open a pull request, and then I look at it and review it. And if I like it and if it conforms to our standards, then I will merge it. Another thing is, of course, issues. If there's like something broken with Ord, then I try to answer questions and try to fix them. And I just have a very high level overview of where the code is, what has to be done, and I can set the direction of the code base.
Okay, great overview. So you do several things. So what would happen if you disappeared tomorrow? An alien abducted you, took him to the moon base. What would happen to Ordinals and to GitHub?
Yeah, so I mean, I am the lead maintainer, but there's also other people that can commit to the database, to the repository. And if I would in the worst case, if I and everyone that has commit access to the repository leaves, it's open source code, so it's still somewhere on the internet. The whole code, someone can just take it, copy it, or in the open source, or generally in coding, you call it forking the repository, and then they can continue work on it. And then people would just switch over to that fork and use that. But yeah, as I said, there's also other people who can merge commits or merge pull requests. One of them is Casey, of course, and the other is Ordinally. But yeah, even if we all disappear, the idea, the code, the DNA of Ord is in the internet, somebody can just continue work on it. And that's kind of the beauty of open source. It's very resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's good that you explain that, because on one hand, people go to the Ordinals GitHub. There's forks and stuff, but this is really where all the action is. The debates are, issues are solved, where the top minds are. So it's very important. Yet, as you pointed out, if the whole team disappeared, Ordinals would live on. It would be disruptive for a while. Things would slow down. But as it stands today, I mean, you guys are it. Okay, so that's what a maintainer does. You kind of gave an explanation overall of what you do. So when I look at your GitHub, there's like a breakdown of what's done. So I see 48% commits, 28% code review, 18% pull requests, and 6% issues. Now, those aren't perfect, probably reflect exactly what it is, but let's go through commits. And let's start off, okay, for those who are totally not technical, what is a commit, and what do you do in terms of commits for the GitHub and Ordinals?
So yeah, I mean, the profile you just showed is like my profile. It's and on GitHub, if you go on my profile, you can kind of see what I do across all the repositories I own. And you see the 44% commits is that of the things I do or that GitHub kind of tracks, 44% of those are commits. And since I'm working mostly on Ord, that's basically where most of the commits land. But what is a commit? A commit is just a change to the code. So it's the smallest change that you kind of merge into merge into the code base. It's kind of this, like how you can imagine it, like this gets into how Git works, is kind of this tree, and every node is kind of a commit. And if you merge something, you take a node and then you make it bring it into kind of the main branch. It's what you call the main or the master branch. And a commit is just like kind of a change, basically. And commits means that I write code and I commit that code. That's what the commit part of the profile tells me. What else was there? What else?
So that's commit. So someone could read. Okay, so that then goes into code review. It says 28%, but I know this is across everything you do. So what does it mean when there's code review?
So code review is what I was talking about before. If somebody opens a pull request, I will have a look at it. So this means I will read through the code. I will comment on the code, like if I like something or do not like something. And every kind of comment I do, I can then request a change. Or if I like everything, I can approve it. And all these kinds of actions is what kind of GitHub tracks and then puts it under the banner of code review. I don't know exactly how the metric works, but like I think it shows that I do also a lot of code review, which is a big part of being a maintainer. Just reading a lot of code as well.
And what percentage would you say is like code that you write versus code that you review versus things that you merge? Do you have an approximate breakdown of what that is?
I mean, I think I commit more than I do code review. If you take lines of code, I think I definitely commit more than I review, because I'm kind of the lead maintainer right now, and this is kind of the main job, kind of making the most changes, because I'm also the one who has the best overview of how things can change, how things can be done. So it's very easy for me to make changes. Most of the time when I make a change, I also don't just like merge it. I ask some of my colleagues or other people to review my code as well. So my code is also reviewed, just like not reviewed by me, by Casey, by very ordinally, or by some other person who is interested in the GitHub and leaves the review. And I always appreciate people leaving a review. Also, if it's just a partial review, like any kind of feedback is very welcome. And that's basically how that works.
Yeah. So it's so fascinating to watch this. It reminds me of a beating heart, where you have all sorts of different things coming in and out, flowing like blood into the repository and into GitHub. And some things just flow in and then they flow out. You never see them again. Other things really, stick there and really become part of it. So it's a fascinating dynamic process. Me as a non-developer to go in and give feedback and read what other people are suggesting. Some things I understand, other things I don't. So it's so fascinating to see. It's all the work behind the scenes, or you could say it's sort of like the engine in your car that you don't always look at, but is there. So anyone who's not active in GitHub, even if you're not technical, I highly recommend you go in there and just see what this process is like. So Raph, you do, obviously, this is obviously important that you review the code, merge things. To what extent can you just make a decision yourself? And when are there times when you need to have others, you kind of consult with Casey or with Ordinals or anyone else, whether something should be committed or not?
I mean, generally any sort of code change that is like non-trivial, like if it's a grammar mistake in the documentation, I think I can merge that without review. But anything that's trivial goes through more than one pair of eyes. So everything is, or at least we try to then if I do the code change and somebody else looks at it, and we want to get as many kind of people looking at the code as possible, so that not only to check that it's correct, but more importantly, so that people working with the code can see the progress and know how the code has changed, so that you can continue kind of like updating everyone's kind of mental model of how the code works. Not only like for correctness, but also kind of like keeping this kind of knowledge in people's head. So all the code reviewers kind of still know what is happening, kind of just keeping up to date with the changes. So if they want to make a change, they can also make it more easily.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so of all the things that have happened in Ordinals, what has been maybe the code that has required the most review, that required the
Mhm.
most thought, that was like the most even consequential, that
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
took the longest of everything?
Yeah, if I think about it, like one of the trickiest part, of course, is building transactions that are ordinal aware. So, I mean, for the viewers who don't really know how ordinals work, it's basically a sequencing of all the single Satoshi, assign sequence numbers to single Satoshis, and you kind of have to keep track where they are. Like normal Bitcoin doesn't care about that. So you have to kind of build a layer in between that is aware, oh, where is which Satoshi and where is which inscription. And specifically, there's this one file, I think it's called the transaction builder, in the repository, and it kind of takes all of these different variables and then it builds a transaction out of it, and it's very tricky. And I remember we wrote a lot of tests to kind of and tested every small part of it. And I remember that was a lot of work trying to get that to work, and also finding all the different edge cases, and um, generally like the high level approach an approach called test driven development, which means that when you want to make a change, the first thing you kind of do is you write a test that tests this change that fails. And then you write the feature. So you change the code, write the feature until the tests pass. And then you go back and refactor, which means you make the code cleaner, more readable. And then you have this loop of like testing, seeing that it's correct, refactoring, testing again, and then this is kind of the test-driven development loop. That's generally how we've approached kind of building Ord. So, and for now, I'm very happy with that approach. Sometimes there's difficulties, like you write a test, which kind of tests always fixate the structure of code, and then you want to refactor, but then the test doesn't really work with the refactor code. So then you also have to rewrite the test, and it can slow down development. Like it can get kind of cumbersome, but especially if you're working with very complex things, where there's a lot of moving parts, like tests give you kind of a reassurance that the thing you're doing is correct. Especially like if you come back to it a week later and you're like, I don't know what the hell I did here. But if you have tests, you can see, okay, the things I wanted to be true are still true. So yeah, it's like the pros and cons. So it makes development slower, but it makes it less error prone in the long term. It's like a trade-off, but I'm happy with that approach.
Yeah, and this transaction builder, I think, is what you said it's called. When did that start? Is this ongoing? Is it done? And how much time has it taken to do that?
I mean, transaction builder just was a small example I had in mind where we had to test a lot. The transaction builder specifically was built for the wallet. So the first thing kind of in Ordinals that was built was by Casey and his former apprentice called Liam, and they kind of built the Explorer just for Ordinals. And then when I started like talking to Casey and collaborating with him, that was, I think, last August, I kind of was tasked to build the wallet. So being able to actually send and receive ordinals and inscriptions. And yeah, I think the transaction builder was started like probably September or October. That's the first time we created that file, and then continuously kind of iterating on it until it is where it is now. So yeah.
Okay. What a lot of people need to understand as lead maintainer, it's not like you work for a company. It's not like you work for Microsoft and they pay you full time to be the maintainer, right? Let's talk about. So I want to start. That's the main point, but I want to go backwards in time to explain how you got here, because obviously to be able to do what you do, you have to have detailed understanding and knowledge of how the code works, but yet you have to be able to see the whole picture to know how the pieces go together, and you have to kind of know the different moving parts and how they come together, and you also have to prioritize. So this isn't something that just happens overnight. So let's go back a year ago. So I think you said you got started in Ordinals July or August. So how did you first hear about Ordinals, and then how did you kind of get involved?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think first time I heard about it, like I was hanging out on Twitter. I had followed Casey for a while, and I saw that he was working on this Ordinals thing. And I had also looked at the repo back then, but it was written in Rust. That's the programming language we use. And at that time, I didn't know any Rust. And I was like, I don't have time, but I would love to like learn Rust, and kind of forgot about it. And a couple of months later, I saw again like Casey talking about it and saying, "Oh, we finished the Explorer. You can now explore Ordinals." I was like, this is so cool. And then I started like looking at the repo in earnest and was like, okay, fuck it, let's learn some Rust. So I sat down for like 2 weeks, learned Rust, and then I started contributing to the code base, just making small changes at first. And then out of that, at some point, me and Casey were writing, and then out of that kind of became a kind of working relationship. So Casey is a very experienced open source developer. He's has a long track record of building like open source tools, and also in Rust. And I saw an opportunity to learn Rust from someone who knows a lot of Rust. And so I was like, okay, like I would love to just like, collaborate with him and work with him to properly learn Rust. And and out of that, kind of we started just regularly sitting down during the week. Like for me, it was in the evening because I'm in Germany. For him, it was in the morning. And then we would like code for like 6-7 hours. We would share our screens. So I would through Discord. So we were sitting in Discord. He was sharing his screen. I was sharing my screen. I have two screens, one on top, one on bottom. I was coding on the bottom, and I saw his screen on top. And then sometimes we coded together. So kind of paired programming is what it's called, where one person codes and the other one is kind of responsible for looking for documentation. But sometimes we would also just work on separate features and just, work on separate things. And then every time I had a question, I could be like, "Hey, Casey, how do I solve this?" And he would just look at his screen and was like, "Ah, yeah, you have to do that." It was a very fun time. And I learned very quickly because I could immediately, if I got stuck, I could immediately like ask him and be like, "Hey, how do you do this? What's the Rust way of doing this?" It was a very cool experience. And now I'm the lead maintainer, kind of because I know the code very intimately, worked on it a long time. And I have, after Casey, I think the best overview of where things are, how to change things, and also kind of the long-term idea. I understand kind of what the vision is and how to get there, or possible steps to get there.
Yeah, so Rust is a not easy language to learn from what I've come to understand. And so when you say you learned in 2 weeks, or it was interesting to you, there must be a lot of motivation, especially since obviously, you weren't getting paid last year to dive into this and to learn Rust. And you said you were working, I think you said like 6, 7, 8 hours on this. So what is it about this last like 12 months ago or so and sooner that for you was worth doing this work, learning Rust, getting involved, coding, quote unquote, for free? Of all the projects that you can do, and you could probably do several things, but what struck you as important and interesting about Ordinals? Because this is, again, a year ago when, few people heard about it or knew about it. So why was it compelling to you?
I was always kind of into Bitcoin. I had running your own node, getting into all of it, reading up onto it. I had contributed to like small stuff in like Lightning, like very small things like Lightning address servers things. And I was always kind of interested in doing something and something with Bitcoin in Bitcoin. And so I kind of naturally gravitated towards this because I saw an opportunity to learn and code on top of Bitcoin. And that was kind of my primary motivation, kind of just working on Bitcoin and working with Casey, because I saw in Casey someone who could, really mentor me or kind of really show me how programming works, because programming is very much, it's almost like what is it called? Like it's an apprenticeship. So you have you learn in university the basics and the abstract theory, but when you actually sit down, you have to kind of learn the tools of your craft. You have to use which editor to use, what kind of command line tools to use, how to think and navigate code, how to use version control. Like there's a lot of kind of tools and like a tacit knowledge that is involved in programming. And so, yeah, that's kind of my primary motivation was learning all of that through like with Casey, and at the same time also working on something adjacent to what I'm interested in. Yeah.
Good timing. Obviously people know Casey is talented, developer and contributor to Bitcoin. He goes back quite a ways in Bitcoin. So good person, but people also don't know that he's a good teacher. He's actually like a good speaker and explainer, and which is impressive because when you're smart, you're not always able to teach things at a lower level or at a beginner level. So it's good you had that. So you were learning a lot. Casey was mentoring you. You were learning as you're going. So before you started contributing to Ordinals, what was your experience and education level when it came to software development and computer science?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I study here in Munich at the Technical University of Munich, computer science. And I know all the theory, and I've coded some small stuff. Mostly before Rust, I was using Golang or Go, which is also a systems programming language. And then, of course, like university, you do like Java and C, C++, Python, OCaml, and Haskell, like all kinds of different. Like you learn everything on a very like shallow level. But I didn't have any like real open source experience other than like small stuff. So this was kind of the first time I really contributed to like a proper and like contributed regularly to a proper open source project. But yeah, I learned quickly, and I had like, even more importantly, I had a great teacher. Like Casey's incredible. Like he can break stuff down, like very complex things. He has a very structured way of thinking, of breaking things down and going until you understand it. So breaking it apart into the simplest pieces, and then until you understand it, and then building it up again. So yeah, I guess I just was very lucky. That's why I could learn so fast. Yeah.
So besides the technical university, you were at Casey University.
I always said I was Casey's apprentice or apprentice programmer. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of hours. So how were you able to spend so much time? Is this while you were in school? So you were doing school and coding as well with Casey?
Doing it next to school. I didn't have so much to do for school during that semester, so I had some extra time, and that's how I could spend time coding on that. Yeah.
And what is it about?
The best decision I've ever done. Like,
oh yeah,
it was very flexible. Like I had to work in the evenings, but I'm night owl anyways, so it kind of worked out for me. I don't think I could have had a better experience doing like an internship or working at some German company in some like IT department. I think that would have been way worse. This was like the ultimate speed run of learning Rust and open source development.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And Bitcoin as a code base, there's a lot to it. You mentioned Lightning, but there's so much to do. What distinguishes Ordinals compared to everything else that Bitcoin can do, where you saw it as something interesting and an opportunity?
It was kind of something new, like programming on Bitcoin or working with Bitcoin is not easy. It has a very idiosyncratic kind of structure, and how it works is not very well understood. There's also no kind of easy programming language for Bitcoin, like in Ethereum. If you want to build an app, you build something in Solidity, which is like its own little thing. There's 1,000 tutorials on YouTube to kind of learn Solidity and build Ethereum apps. But in Bitcoin, it's more hidden. You can find them. There's really good resources, but it's not as prevalent, as easy to find. So I definitely say it's more difficult to build stuff on Bitcoin. And what attracted me to Ordinals, or the idea of Ordinals, I think I really like the what really got me hooked first was the rare sats. So the first thing I contributed to was this clock that kind of shows the different cycles that Bitcoin has. And these cycles also define the different kind of traits that single Satoshis have. And that kind of, I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. Like you can like collect Satoshis that are kind of have cool, quirky properties or have a cool history, kind of scavenge hunting for cool things. And then that was kind of, inscriptions weren't a thing back then when I started. So it was only sats and kind of tracking sats and these rare stats. And then as we started like getting into the code and trying to make inscriptions work, I thought like, oh man, this is really cool. Like now you have actually this kind of digital artifact that works together seamlessly with how Bitcoin works without having to fork anything or having to wait for any new feature in Bitcoin itself. It just like works on top. And yeah, that's that I found that very cool.
Yeah, a lot of people forget that it sort of starts with the Satoshis, and it wasn't like happened over a week where able to define and search for specific sats and their characteristics. Most people, I think, when they think of the word ordinals, they think of the inscriptions and the art or whatever it might be. And I think that's a strength of Bitcoin, that it uses the UTXO model, number one. But number two, what you can't replicate is the history of Bitcoin. So what makes these Satoshis unique is they were like in a block mined by Satoshi himself. Or maybe it's the first Satoshi of the first block, or the halving. So how much does Bitcoin's history, what are we in, 13, 14 years or so of Bitcoin? What is it about Bitcoin's history and UTXO model that makes it so unique in terms of being able to do what we can do compared to like Ethereum or other chains?
The UTXO model, what makes it, I mean, with Ethereum, the problem with, I don't want to get like into the debate with like Ethereum versus Bitcoin. Like every one of these models has kind of different trade-offs. In Ethereum, you have like global state and you have re-entry bugs and stuff like that. And the UTXO model is is more private as well. I don't think there's anything like intrinsically that attracted me to the UTXO model in itself. It's kind of just how Bitcoin works. But when you kind of understand it, it's kind of elegant. It's very nice how it works. But yeah, I don't really have anything that specifically made a UTXO model more attractive than say any other model.
Yeah, I've heard that people say that Bitcoin is, elegant in its simplicity, and maybe that's even how Satoshi put it. But yet it's also hard to work with. So why is it hard to work with? I know it's intimidating for a lot of developers that I've talked to. Is that because when it was developed back in 2008, and supposedly Satoshi had been working on it for several years, is it because that was like an old way of doing things? Was it because Satoshi was kind of like his own quirky way of it? What specifically is it that makes Bitcoin a little bit harder compared to other blockchains or just other open source projects?
I honestly don't know. I think it could also be just a problem of the right resources. Like I know there's really good Bitcoin resources, but yeah, I think in Bitcoin you have to think about more of the whole, like you have to really dive deep and think of the whole system, whereas maybe in Ethereum you can just work on the Solidity code, like abstraction layer, and that's it. You don't have to think about anything else. Whereas in Bitcoin you have to think a little bit deeper and understand more of the intricacies. So maybe that's kind of a bigger hurdle. But other than that, I don't have a strong opinion like why, or strong reason for why one is easier than or more difficult than the other than that it is.
It is what it is. Yeah, that's the nature of it.
Yeah.
And what are you seeing from developers who first come in and start contributing? What do you see as their two things? What do you see that they're excited about it, and what do you see as their challenges to be able to contribute and understand it?
I mean, a lot of it is they are still trying to, since inscriptions work on ordinals, the first thing kind of people have to kind of understand is how ordinals work, and then kind of how ordinals are birthed, how they are created. So a lot of time they don't understand that like an ordinal is created or is assigned its number when it is mined. So through the subsidy, the block subsidy, and then then you have to kind of know that kind of the block subsidy decreases exponentially over the next 100 years. And that's kind of how you get like a lot of Satoshis that have already been mined, and then you get consecutively less. I think some people don't really think about how Bitcoins are created, and that kind of, since Ordinals is very much tied to how Bitcoin is created, since they're assigned a Satoshi number at their kind of creation, that's kind of, I think, the first thing that people glance over or don't get at the first try. They just see like, I can put like data on the blockchain. I just want to push some JPEGs onto Bitcoin and like use it as ever. But you kind of have to understand these things. But that's, I also think, what's very beautiful about Ordinals and inscriptions is because it pulls you into the rabbit hole. So you see it for the first time, and then you're like, what's that? What's that? And then it kind of pulls you into trying to understand how Bitcoin works. It's kind of a nice little what is it called? Nerd sniping. People want to understand how it works, so they see something and then they go to as far as they can go to be able to understand it. I mean, I had a friend. He's a very talented kind of developer and hacker, and he had been exposed to Bitcoin. I mean, maybe in 2014 or 15, but he didn't really believe in it and kind of forgot about it. And then I told him about inscriptions and ordinals, and then I kind of got him to really dive deep into it. And then he would like, for like weeks, he would be like, but like, what is SegWit? Like, how does Taproot work? Like all of these like little details, like what is the SegWit discount? Like all of these like small little details he would like ask me, because he was kind of pulled back into Bitcoin. And so that was all through kind of ordinals. And he was like, oh, damn, this is interesting. I want to know again. And so now he's up to date again. I still have to get him to contribute to Rust, to the code base, but he doesn't know a lot of Rust, so he hasn't contributed yet. But maybe I can with a little bit more convincing.
Yeah, that's what I love about Ordinals is it takes you back to the basics, because like you said, it starts with, mining and the creation of, Satoshis and UTXO. And so unlike so many other, excuse me, unlike so many other things with Bitcoin, you really start at the fundamental layer, and it's actually otherwise might be boring for some people, but when you understand like what you can do with it later on with inscriptions and numerical values, all of a sudden I think it becomes more interesting to people of the block subsidy and how it diminishes over time and why that is. And just right. And then just people, there's a lot of people who love art and creativity. And so that draws people in.
Yeah, I definitely think with Bitcoin, or generally, like when you have an asset that you can kind of hold basically, or that you can truly own, like a piece of gold in your hand, you have to kind of get used to how that works. And in Bitcoin, how you do that is like you get a hardware wallet and you write down your seed, and you kind of take responsibility and like carry your own risk in kind of storing this asset that you have. And I think what Ordinals can kind of bring as well is that people get used to kind of having something in their hand that they value, and then like actually like try to like in their mind kind of touch and kind of feel what it means, like what Bitcoin means as a value, as a money. And I think inscriptions can kind of bring that into can kind of further that people just get an intuitive feeling for what it means to actually truly own a digital asset. So I think that, I don't know if I express myself very like elegantly here, but I think you can just
No, absolutely. I think you said it well. Once people have it, like sort of, it's more of a tangible thing, or maybe it's something that they could at least in their mind visualize. Because otherwise it's sort of abstract.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin in itself is very abstract, and you kind of have to buy into it and accept this abstraction and this weird thing as something that is valuable. But once you do, it gives you like, it's very powerful. And I think inscription could do the same. So yeah, and for that, I'm thinking at some point would be, I think people are already doing this. So you can like, there's these wallets that work on like cards. Like I think there's multiple people. So you put where the private key is actually on like a small little card, and you could put like an inscription onto this card, and then you could pass it around, and then they actually own the inscription just by passing it around, because the actual private key is on this thing. So it's like passing around a piece of gold, and then when you hold it, you own it. So I think people have already started doing that, but I think I think I should try to make that work with the wallet. That's a good idea, and see how you could inscribe like inscriptions onto like a card. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. I'll have to take a look at that and see what that's about. Something that I ran across.
Yeah, Cold Card produces these Sats cards, I think, and you can put Bitcoin on it. Like you could also, of course, now put an inscription on it, but then sending it's not ordinal aware, so that would be a little bit risky. But if you integrate that nicely, you could have like the same way you pass around this like the Sats card with the Bitcoin, you could pass around inscriptions. Yeah.
Oh, that's what it is. Cold Card. The
Sats card. Yeah, exactly.
Sats cards. Okay, Sats card.
Called, yeah.
I'll take a look at that.
Or the
something.
Open Dime is also one thing. It's like the small little, looks like a USB stick, and then you can like one-time use, kind of send it. Actually hold the Bitcoin.
We just got to get Cold Card to become truly open source, not source available. But that's another topic for another day.
Yeah.
Another topic for another day. Yeah. Speaking of like cards, I saw that Danny Deasy, he has they've made these sort of trading cards, but with ordinal names. So a lot of people don't know this, but every, Satoshi ordinal has a name assigned that's been generated, and the ones that exist are shorter, are longer, and over time to become shorter, I think is what it is. But anyways, so what Danny did is he found names that actually mean something, like actual words, and then they created artwork for that thing, for that name, right, to visualize that. Have you seen those?
Not yet, but that's great. I love that. Can you like send me the link later or blend it in?
Yeah.
After.
I'll send it to you on Twitter. But yeah, it's really neat because they took these ordinal names and then visualized it in art, which is another cool way that I've been talking about, how by having it be something visual, tangible that people can see, because names haven't been used really for any application yet. These actual ordinal names, not .sats, but the actual names of the Satoshis. And I hope more people start to use that. I remember when Casey first told me about this, when he told me directly, not just I was following him on Twitter, but in December of last year, he messaged me about this, and he knew that I was working on my app Trajan, which has, blockchain Bitcoin naming system. And he suggested, hey, maybe you could use, these names for people. It's not quite practical for a lot of applications yet, especially since a lot of the good names, are hard to get. But I think it's another example.
It's a great example. And like Casey chose the way the names are generated in kind of reverse order, so that the good names are not all gone in the first couple blocks. And so they will slowly kind of will be revealed or will be mined. And then they can be like a DNS system. So you can, it's a very clunky one, but also a very resilient and decentralized one, where basically if you own the SAT, then you inscribe something on that SAT with that name, and then that's the DNS record. That's like very long term, and the reason we chose the reverse order is so that there's enough time for like the markets to be created around ordinals, so that then miners kind of split like interesting names and SATs out, and then you can trade these single SATs. So either in 100 years there will be a thriving market for these names, or there will be no market at all. So yeah,
we'll see. I searched for a few different words and names. I saw Ragnar's there, but my full name is not available. Ragnar Lifthrasir. It's too many letters, so unfortunately, my first and last name's not available. I don't know if you've looked for your name.
I think I have. You could just in ordinals.com, you can just like in the search bar, you can put your name in, and then the SAT will pop up. I think we also ordinals. We have this rare.txt, which is I think just a what was this again? I forgot. Anyways, but you can just type in your name, and then you can see if there's a Satoshi and when it will be mined. So my name, I think, will be mined in 2082. So yeah, 2082. Over 80 years old. When my name is
put it on your put it on your calendar. So if you ever
either
have
I'm
kids,
alive, or maybe my grandkids will buy it for me in my memory, and then put it on my tombstone or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, I almost wish you guys had done it the other way around. So like the good names are all taken up and then they can be traded because
The problem with that is that all
yeah.
the good names, because the block subsidy was so large in the first blocks, all of the good names would have been gone. I mean, we're already at like 19 million Bitcoin mined. So all of the good ones would have been kind of locked into the first couple of blocks that like belong to Satoshi. So they would be like not accessible. At least now they will be accessible in the future. So yeah, that was the idea.
That makes sense. Unless Satoshi starts, moving his Bitcoins around, a lot of names are
exactly. Or like, yeah, we get quantum computers and we break elliptic curve cryptography, and people will be spending Satoshi's Bitcoin.
Yeah, we'll see. So it was good. It's just we have to wait, unfortunately. But Bitcoin is a long-term project. I love how Bitcoin builders think of it in terms of like even decades. Like you guys have thought about this in terms of decades, not next year. So it makes Bitcoin so durable. I love names. I mean, I could talk about that for a long time. But just we are going to have Danny on the podcast. So when that comes out, that'll be a good time to.
I'll definitely see what he's up to.
Yeah, he does
definitely
a lot.
Going to get more into hang out more on Twitter and get back into the discussion. I have more time now to contribute to Ord, kind of get into the ecosystem and like see where it's at. But yeah, I'm excited to see what people are doing.
I want to go back for a second to the start of the conversation where we talked about what you do as a maintainer. And I'd like to hear from you what has been maybe the most like consequential or difficult problem that you guys had to deal with and ultimately decide, because at some point you have to decide, right? And so one thing I'm thinking of, maybe this is off, but like cursed inscriptions off by one. Can you I can see
I can talk about that.
Could you explain to people what that was, how you guys decided what you decided, what was the process?
So I think the biggest mistake was creating inscription numbers. So we were working on inscriptions, and I think it was either Casey or me, probably Casey, was like, it would be cool to kind of assign inscriptions numbers because they're kind of sequential and you can just, assign them a number. And I was like, yeah, I mean, sounds cool. Like give inscriptions a number. And then what we did is kind of, we wanted to get out inscriptions. So it was kind of January or February. And then we wanted to kind of get the version 1 out, or version 0.01, so that people could kind of start using it. And we took like some shortcut. We took a transaction and only kind of looked at the first inscription in that transaction. We just looked at one, and then assigned it an inscription number and then inscription ID, and then sent it out. And then what kind of happened, because a lot of people started using it, is that inscriptions would not land kind of there would be multiple inscriptions per transaction. And since we had this kind of little shortcut where we would only like look at the first one, we would kind of ignore all the inscriptions below that, and of course not assign them a number, which meant that they were not recognized at that point, and then the numbers, if you would add them back, they would get out of whack. So they would like have to reorder the numbers. And then people kind of expected the numbers, and I think people still use kind of the numbers as the main identifier. So we couldn't risk people, changing the numbers and then people kind of sending inscriptions they didn't want to send because they were using the numbers instead of what is correct is the inscription ID. Inscription ID is unique and it's the better way of kind of using inscriptions. But all people were really fixated on the numbers. And so, because of that, we had to kind of find a way to get the inscriptions that we ignored, which were valid inscriptions, kind of give them a number. And so we decided to give them a negative number. I mean, at some point we were thinking of just like getting rid of numbers completely, but I think people would have not taken kindly to that. And the original mistake was just assigning numbers in the first place. But so we had to kind of assign them a negative number, and that's kind of where these cursed inscriptions comes from. Cursed are just those inscriptions we did not recognize before, which were valid, and they're cursed because they have a negative number. And that's kind of was a very difficult decision of how to make it work. And then also in the code base, it's very tricky. There's many different cases of cursed inscriptions, many different edge cases. That was a difficult thing. That's one of the first things I did when I became lead maintainer, because it was a very controversial topic, and I just had to make a decision and move forward. We started implementing cursed inscriptions. So there's still a couple of types of inscriptions we do not recognize, and that'll be like an ongoing thing. But at some point, we will kind of have enumerated most of the inscriptions that we think are valid. And at that point, we will kind of introduce a blessed era or a blessed block. And after that block, all the new cursed inscriptions will get a positive number. So the old ones will keep their negative number, and the new ones will be integrated into the normal kind of ordering. And that'll probably be a conversation over the next couple of months when to kind of have this activation height or blessed era. But yeah, like often things, you're like path dependent. So sometimes you make a decision and you can't go back. And the kind of decision we made was assigning inscription numbers. And now, you can't really roll it back, especially if you work in a distributed kind of system, like where everyone is running their own thing, and it's like a very big community running their own thing. It's not like I have my own little server and can do everything I want. As soon as it's out in the world, I have to kind of balance everything and see what the best decision is. But I'm okay with the decision we made, like how to fix it. And we just have to kind of figure out the details. But I think it will be fine.
Yeah, it sounded like, so you as a maintainer, then Casey, and then everyone else, you guys took into consideration different points of view. I think you might have reached out to me once and asked me, what I thought, and I'm sure lots of other people. And me, I'm maybe an ordinal extremist in the sense that I didn't care about numbers. I would have been fine with getting rid of numbers completely and just done, transcription ID. But I'm not like, I think probably a lot of people, especially people who are there for the inscription numbers and the art. And I think a lot of the early holders didn't want their number ruined. So they have a valid use case. So it's interesting how you guys navigated that and came up with, the solutions. And you don't make everyone happy, right? There are some people who wish you had done it differently, and other people are very happy, and there's people in between.
I think we made most people happy. I mean, there's still some like inscriptions we haven't recognized yet, but I think that'll be a conversation. Like some will be recognized, some not. And if people aren't happy with the decision, they can always fork the repo, start their own thing. And then if most of the people switch over to that and think that's kind of the better way of doing it, then they will do it like that. And then maybe then we will pull in that change. But it's kind of a very rough consensus kind of thing. You just have to make a decision and see where it goes. And if you're unhappy with it, you can fork it. So,
rough consensus is the key. And that's how Bitcoin has always worked. We'll see if there's ever a major, controversy in the sense that maybe will it ever happen that something is so dramatic in Ordinals that someone will want to fork it and say, we don't like how those guys have been doing it, Casey and Raph and those other guys and girls, and we're going to fork it, and then they somehow gain share. It's always possible. You never know. I mean, you saw, right? And that's the fun. That's the fun of it. And the market decides. Well, I think by talking about this, what you've been doing as a maintainer and the kind of work and pressure that you're under and the other people making these decisions, having to listen to so many people, yet understand the code, yet think about the long term, yet be practical. It's a lot. And, this isn't, again, you don't work for like the Ordinals Corporation. It's an open source project. And so you're not paid like, 6-figure salary to do this. So you guys started the Open Ordinals Institute to kind of help support the open source contributors to Ordinals. So can you tell us about the Open Ordinals Institute, the nonprofit that you guys started?
Yeah, sure. So, in order to kind of like the broad goal with the Open Ordinals Institute is kind of get funding to support everything kind of going on with Ord and the ecosystem, and do it in a manner that's like very that's a very normal way to support open source projects. So many open source projects have foundations, or some kind of nonprofit that kind of gets money from big companies using the open source software and then distributes it to contributors or to lead maintainers or to people kind of maintaining kind of this open source piece of code. And so we just copied that model from the existing way of doing things, and founded the Open Ordinals Institute. We called it Institute because we wanted we didn't want to use foundation, just do it a little bit different. And on this institute at the moment, it's like we have a board, and then some. We have like the minimum amount, like we have 4 board members and then 3 kind of in the management, and then we mostly hold our money in like a multi-sig, and then distribute it mostly to me at the moment to kind of build Ord out. But depending on how much money we collect, I would love to get more like paid contributors working with me. So I'm kind of build a small team to make this work and make it nice. There's a lot of stuff.
I'm glad you guys did that. I mean, it's overdue. It takes a while. We had Erin as our first guest on the Ordinals podcast. We launched with her. She's great, and I know she's part of it. So who's on the team of the Open Ordinals Institute? What do they do there?
Okay, so the board at the moment is Casey, Erin, Ordinally, and me. And then I think you have to have minimum of 3 roles. So you need a president, a treasurer, and a secretary. Erin is the president at the moment. Ordinally is the treasurer, and I'm the secretary. Doesn't really mean anything in practice, but that's kind of what you have to have as a nonprofit. And we mostly just work in Bitcoin. So we have a multi-sig, 2 out of 4 multi-sig, and people can donate to an address, maybe can blend it in or something, the website or something, and then we distribute funds from there and try to make this a sustainable kind of effort. As you said, like we're thinking long term, building like Bitcoin is thinking long term. Ordinals shares that DNA. We want to build cool stuff long term, get cool artists, get cool culture, get developers, and that's a good kind of structure to manage that.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys set that up, because before it was you always had that address that people can donate to, which was good. But just having a more structured thing, especially nonprofit, if a company is going to donate a certain amount, US companies, they can write that off for their taxes, and that actually does influence decisions. Most definitely. So it's good, even though it's like, who wants to run a nonprofit? It's not as fun as doing some software, but it's actually good you guys did that, gave some legitimacy to it. And I was happy to see people are contributing to it. Is there anything you could that offhand, like big contributors, any companies that you mentioned that of?
I have not looked at. There was a lot when we announced it. There was a lot of people on Twitter who announced that they're donating, and I'm very thankful to all those people. I don't have any specific companies that I know of, but you can look at Twitter and the Open Ordinals. We kind of retweet and like, and I try to also kind of write something when I see it. I wasn't very active on Twitter the last couple months, but I'll get back into it and then get a better overview who has contributed or donated.
We lost you for a second there. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so you were saying how you got off Twitter for a bit, kind of busy with other things, but you were saying you're gonna try to get more active.
Yeah, exactly. So now we have this formal structure. I'm more I have more time now to work on Ord, and we're gonna see gonna form the ecosystem, see where to go. There's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of things in the code base that need to happen. A lot of features. People are anticipating parent-child reinscriptions. There's also like some very standard, low-level code maintenance, looking at the database works, reorg resistance. There's a litany of stuff that has to be done. Just has to be heads down and working from now.
Yeah. So if people think that Ordinals is pretty close to being done, the protocol is ready to ossify and you have all the features there, it's not true. There's so much work to do that you have to do and that other people have to do, other contributors. So it's good that you're set up now with the Open Ordinals Institute, had that structure in place.
Yeah.
So you mentioned those things that need to be done or are on the roadmap. As we close out here, can you just tell us, where you are today with university and what your plans are for the next 6 months and even 12 months out?
So yeah, I'm done for now with university. So the next month is going to be full-time Ord. I will be working on the code base. Going to look at all the PRs that people have opened over the last couple of months that I haven't been able to get to. Gonna build a lot of features. I'm also organizing a conference with a couple others in Amsterdam. Just kind of also showcase new Ordinals features. But the next 6 months I'll definitely be heads down working. I'm probably going to be at some conferences, like in Singapore. I'll be at a conference. And then of course Amsterdam, the Bitcoin conference. I will also be in Berlin at like a Bitcoin dev conference. And then maybe also in Miami, there's another conference, Ord Basel. I'm going to reach out, get into the ecosystem, see what people are working on, and then see how I can build the tools necessary for people to create cool art and create stuff on Bitcoin and on Ordinals. Just have to get to know I have to see people working with it, and then I can better decide what direction to take. I need the feedback, and I think I will be doing that for the next couple of months.
Well, it's exciting to see you're done with university. It's exciting now you'll have a little, maybe more time to devote to things and get kind of more interactive on the social side of things, Twitter and of course Ordicord. So I encourage people to get on GitHub, talk to Raph on Twitter, give him your thoughts, but more importantly, try to contribute something, try to give positive, useful feedback, because I know you guys really pay attention to that. Well, Raph, this has been a great conversation. I'm so glad that we talked. I mean, it's really, I think, hopefully will educate people about how, where the code base is and how it's maintained and how decisions are made and who's behind it. So I'll close out with one final question for you, which I asked all my guests, which is, do you have one inscription that you own that you would never sell or transfer? And if so, why?
Sure. I have a couple of the first 100 inscriptions, I have one of the first 10 inscriptions. I'll probably never sell that. And the others inscriptions are probably also. Sorry, ich kann grad nicht. Sorry about that. Okay. I have one of the top 10 inscriptions that I probably won't sell. And a couple of the top 100. Like, we're bringing out like a parent-child feature. Maybe I will use one of those top 100 inscriptions as my parent, as the kind of global thing to kind of define my on-chain inscription path hierarchy. But other than that, I don't think I will sell any of those. They're high-end art, high-end digital collectibles.
Digital artifacts. Raph's sitting on some early digital artifacts, and what's great about parent-child is that he can build off of those. So that's really exciting. Well, again, Raph, thanks for coming on the Ordinals Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please rate and review our show. Subscribe to the Ordinals Podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite app, and follow us on Twitter at the OrdPod. Drop us a line at podcast@ord.media for topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to interview. Ordinals 2024 conference is taking place in Nashville. Early bird passes are available now. Visit ord.media and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks for listening to the Ordinals Podcast, produced by Ord Media.